All right, welcome to the Tuesday Triggers podcast. For those of you that don't know Patrick Joyce, you've been living under a rock. I think you've been you were like early gen LinkedIn influencer. And so like you've always had great content out there. You've always had a voice out there. I would love to spend the day kind of chatting about, what gets you going. I know that we've kind of talked about, hey, let's talk about what it takes to build an agency. I think those are all things that are at like the top of a lot of people's minds right now, especially for people who are just getting started, whether it means starting building an agency or building a sales team, whatever that means. I think it's all super relevant. That being said, though, why don't you give an introduction and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for the kind words there. I wouldn't call myself an influencer as much as like I've been out there, like I've had a public voice, but I consider myself almost more in the background. Like I have been I've worked with a lot of really great people and like learned a lot along the way, and I used a lot of networking skills to help me get there pretty quickly. So just like, I don't know, a 30-second origin story. I started out as a high school math teacher when I got out of when I graduated from college, and didn't like it, wanted to get into tech, wanted to get into sales, took a job as an SDR back in 2017, and like just loved it right out of the gate. I was like, this is great, man. Like there's just so much flexibility. Like, hey, if you set the meetings, nobody asks you what you're doing with your day or how much time you spent. Like it's just a meritocracy. And I fell into really enjoying myself at tech companies, and then like sort of leveled my way up into working for, selling bigger, more expensive products to bigger companies, and just building on my skill set there. And all along the way, I took some lessons that I learned from my brother when I worked with him in the Teamsters Union while I was in college. Like I watched him network, and the way that he networked is he did a lot of favors for people. Like his phone rang constantly because people were always going to him for things, and he was always like handing stuff out. Like he would get a side job, and instead of doing it himself, would give it to someone else. So he had like this big network of people that were kind of supporting him, and he like built a name for himself that way. So I literally just carbon copied the exact same process, but in the tech industry. So I've always been a guy that like people can count on, that I'm trying to help people connect for jobs, and like that stuff comes back to you tenfold, especially if you're not doing it so that you can get something particular out of the person that you're helping. So anyway, that's kind of how I sort of built my name, my reputation. And it was like a very specific strategy starting out. I always try to talk about it on shows like this because I think that it's a point that people miss very easily.
Yeah, I mean, what is that cheesy saying about network is net worth, right? But it comes back to again the thing that I talk about all the time, and I think like something that we're super alike on is I'm always a giver, man. Like I'm always trying to add value. I'm always trying to put it out there, like again, do the same type of thing. And I think that's where this whole community that I built was born from, was like the value of yeah, knowing that like don't do it for some reason just to get something back. Like try and really like, know that it'll come back to you later, but just do good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's about creating a positive feedback loop for yourself
Yeah.
in a group of people, like in a work group of people. Like that to me is networking. Networking to me is not going to a conference and handing out my business card, or like, like connecting to random people I never meet on LinkedIn. Like that,
Right.
I do plenty of that, but that to me is not the networking activity. The networking activity is like sort of like compiling all these one-to-one relationships you have with all these different people, like everybody that I interact with, and like how can I do a favor for this person? Yeah, and it really works.
I think like one of the cool things, one of like I think things that you should certainly be proud of is, there's been these kind of eras of like thought leadership on LinkedIn, right? And you were certainly around again when the like Josh Braun and Justin Michael, some of these people, again, I won't go into too many names. Some have gone like a good route and I think are still providing value. And some are kind of like clinging on to what used to be and haven't really adapted to the changes in market cycles. Like a lot of like frameworks for copywriting and like some of these things that are at the core competency were things that were created by you. So how did you like, how were you, as those things were coming out like and cutting edge and copy was changing and evolving and like really like the early years, which again, it sounds silly, but like, the 2021, 2022, when like people were like just blundering around and sending 47 step sequences. How are you kind of innovating in that era, in that time?
Yeah, it's an interesting point because like while it was happening, I knew that there's a shelf life to everything that I was doing. Just because like I've seen the seasonality of the trends and like things work for a while because they're new and then they're not new anymore and then they don't work anymore. And then there's like a new batch of things that comes in.
It's
Um,
super cyclical.
and once you've seen a couple of them go by, you start to realize that like there's not really any special sauce to what I'm doing right now. So like I think the like mental framework that I use to think about it is the better of a job you can do at, especially through cold email, at like joining the conversation that is happening in the prospect's head, the better of a time you're going to have. And that's like an old, marketing adage, just like marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
But it's really about, and I take this all the way back to my teaching days. It's really about trying to see the world through the perspective of the person that you're trying to communicate an idea with, and like genuinely doing that. Like, not your job is not to inform them of some information that you have that they don't. Like, that's going to be one of the end results, but that's not like the objective that I'm shooting for in the beginning. The objective that I'm shooting for in the beginning is to try to understand what their worldview is like, and then two, communicate with them that I understand what their worldview is like. And the better of a job that I can do at that, like the more open that person's ears are going to be or their eyes are going to be to whatever I have to say to them or show them.
Yeah, 100%, right? It's like, in debates or something when people are just vehemently on on their own side of the fence, like nothing is ever going to change, right? You really have to understand the other person's perspective and get in their shoes. And that is like that's a really tough challenge to do, and to do that at scale in today's cold email world, because you need to send like to be successful. This is just my opinion. Like, gone are the days of like, oh, like you need to go read that person's most recent blog article and or read their book and send them an email with like an excerpt on page 35, because it's not scalable. It's not like realistic, right? Like maybe you can do that for a small portion of your time, but it has to be a tool in your arsenal. It can't be the whole arsenal.
Yeah, and I think that there is a time and a place for that. Like the work that I've done on enterprise sales teams myself and consulting enterprise clients on business development, like there is a certain amount of research there, but the I think people miss the mark with the personalization thing. Like it's kind of a hack. Like in the beginning when nobody was doing any of that type of research, it was like a pattern interrupt. Like somebody would get the email and be like, "Oh my gosh, like this person actually like took the time to try to understand." But then as soon as that started to scale and everybody started doing it, it just turned into white noise immediately. It's like, "Oh, I saw you're a Chicago Bears fan and our software is going to give you vision like the quarterback has on the field." And like, do this whole like, you take 45 minutes to write an email and it doesn't go anywhere. But I think like where it does come into play is like I had a project like this. It was I was working with like this national or international IT services company, one of the biggest IT companies in the world, that was selling to like Fortune 100 CPG companies. And what we were doing is like looking at what was going on with their executive team in the news and then reading between the lines and then trying to map the account and then trying to make some kind of an inference and then referencing that in my outreach.
Yeah.
That is not scalable, but that is like the kind of personalization that I think has a big impact. And
Yeah.
it's not even really personalization as much as it is like, I don't know, like having your head on a swivel and just being aware of what's going on and being able to like having some acumen to be able to like read between the lines and like just look alive. Like that kind of thing stands out compared to, your like more generic outreach. Like I think
Yeah.
LinkedIn tips from the feed of like, the sales influencers that are out there and then went and like wrote the perfectly crafted email that gets, a 99 score in your AI tool. That doesn't do as much as like reading the news articles and figuring the thing out and like, trying to strategize who you're reaching out to and what you're saying based on that.
Yeah, I think that, again, still just my opinion here. You're totally right, but it needs to be a piece of it, right? Like, I don't know any sales org. I mean, even the most tenured sales directors that have this Rolodex a mile long and they spend all of their time just digging into their network, like, you still need to supplement that, like 99% of the time to continue driving new funnel. And to supplement that, you need some broad strokes outreach, you need some super tight targeted outreach, You just need
Yeah,
to cover all of your bases, which I think.
definitely. Definitely. Like I ran into multiple instances where like I would get an account list that had 10 companies on it. And they're like big companies. And it was like you don't get any more accounts. Like you have to go like find a way to start a conversation at these companies. And they're, Fortune 50 like fintech companies. And like you're not gonna find anybody's phone number. Like they're just like they don't exist on the internet. So like what do you do? So then you start like, okay, going through and like I'm gonna build a list of like 30 potential people that could be relevant, and I'm gonna like cycle through five or six of them at a time and like try to ping my way around, like get a response from somebody and then reference that. That's the by hand kind of approach, like that works at enterprise, but like mid-market tech startup isn't gonna do that for every prospect that they have, right? Like now you need a different strategy. Now you need like how am I gonna scale this? And I think that both of those modes of thinking though have to center on like what is the worldview of the person that I'm trying to reach out to.
100%. I think it's to your point about personalization. I think it's obviously this comes in huge waves, but like even remember like okay, let's say 18 months ago when it was like, oh, write a personalized first line that basically says like, hey, I see you sell shoes to children, like, and it's like that has now become again white noise, right? Like literally, as soon
Even
as I see that,
go
I shut my.
like go all the way back to first name as a dynamic field. That was new at one point.
Yeah.
Right? There was just marketing emails that would just go to every email address that had no way to like pull in that field. Like mail merge was like a game changer.
I remember in 20 like 17 or 16, 2017, I think I mail merged this giant list I had built in Word, and I got one name off in the rows, and I sent out like 2,500, and it was probably one of my more successful email sequences. It was one of my first, and sent out another sequence, apologized to everyone because I messed up their name. And they're like, "Oh, that's cool. I've always wanted to be called like." Jorge or
Yeah.
something. But anyways, all right. So let's dive. I want to make sure we spend a little time um, talking about trends that you're seeing or talk about like what we came here to talk about, right? Like some of the things that you're seeing in scaling an organization or an agency, and some of the things that have helped you be so successful in doing so. So I don't know if we want to pivot, but like would love to kind of jump into some of those types of things.
Yeah, happy to riff on that. So my experience in agency is like I worked for years as an individual contributor and then like ended up working with Justin Michael, a guy, that I hired him to coach me, and then he hired me back to go help him do his consulting work, which that's what got me into the agency space. The work that I was doing there was I was freelancing, writing content for five different agencies at a time. So I was just getting a ton of different looks at like businesses that were going to an agency and saying, hey, we need some outreach and like, can you write the copy for us? So, like in a very short window of time, I was getting like dozens of like campaigns that I was building from scratch in like this like really condensed 6 month period, which just gave me like this perspective on what kind of research do you need to, how do you most effectively spend your time when you're trying to do research to like onboard clients, which then lends itself very nicely into the role that I'm in now, which is like managing fulfillment for like a somewhat scaled up outbound SDR agency. And like we focus mainly on cold calling. Like we have email and LinkedIn services as well, but like our bread and butter is skilled cold callers. We've got 30 cold callers on staff across like 60 different clients. And sometimes it moves really quickly. Like we onboarded 20 customers in January, which was insane. So like while that was happening, I'm trying to get my reps up to speed as quickly as possible while I'm also trying to build a system to make that even possible. Because like the stuff that I was like the research that I'm trying to do manually, it just wasn't going to scale. There's only one of me and there's like so many of them, and like I can only do so much of it at once. So what I ended up doing is like engineering the onboarding form that the customer fills out and then setting up an automation that triggers as soon as like my customer fills out their onboarding form, it triggers this automation where there's four specific questions that I'm asking them, which are like, what are the pain points that you solve? How is your customer doing that today without you? What is the tech that they would need to integrate with? And what does your competitive landscape look like? So those are the four core questions that I base all the enablement material off of. So I have an automation that pulls the answers that the client gave me from those questions and then like runs it through AI and creates like an SDR cheat sheet so that now when I hand the account to the rep, they've got a one pager that gives them a very quick idea of what's going on. There's also a bunch of other work on like who's your ICP and like how do we build a list, and like that's sort of almost like a separate exercise. But getting the rep up to speed quickly was like public enemy number one in my book, because otherwise, if it's a cold start, like the rep gets on a call with the client and then they're kind of starting from scratch, like, oh, what is it that you guys do? Like, that's what we were doing before. That is not as good of a look as what is happening now. Client fills out the onboarding form, creates the cheat sheet, I hand it to the rep, and then I load that into an AI practice environment. So we have the software called Itero, where I can go and build a bot. So Itero asks me those four questions. It's actually where I got them from. Um, and 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 I put the answers that I got through my AI enhanced version of it into the software, and then the rep can go practice calling against a bot that like sounds like what a prospect is going to sound like. Like I've created their worldview in an AI environment. So now my rep has a one pager that tells me what the company does. They've done a bunch of practice calls against this AI bot, and then they get to the client and now they have a point of view and they have questions to ask. So we look super buttoned up. And all that happens in like a 5 working day period, like a really short amount of time. So that's like I'd say my biggest accomplishment so far is building a system for the rep to get onboarded very quickly so that we can hit the ground running.
Man, that's awesome, because that is certainly one of our biggest challenges as an agency is, man, the onboarding process is we try and automate as much of it as possible, but it's still really tedious, and it's the first impression, right? Like that's like where when you start working with a client, and so this is like advice for anyone, whether it's you're a salesperson in a company and you onboard a client, but like that means everything to everyone, or to your client, is like that first like couple weeks is like, how are you communicating with them? How effective are you communicating with them? Are you dropping any balls? And like, assuming that, sorry about that, assuming that you don't do that, then you're good. But like anything in that first month for me is like, man, you just want to make sure it's like as smooth of a process as possible, right?
Yeah, and I think I've done a bunch of the agency work. I think it adds complexity when you're hiring a fractional cold caller, because the cold callers are fantastic. They're very skilled at what they do, but they don't necessarily have like the executive presence to like present well in front of the client. Like you have to manage that. Like from an agency perspective, like you're introducing this whole other variable that is like a person that is just, I mean, they're just kind of joining the call and they don't really have much of an agenda, and they're just kind of, trying to communicate what they're hearing on the phone to the client.
I've also, in my experience, a lot of the best cold callers are like, pretty like they're rough around the edges. They don't give a shit when
Yeah,
they
man.
they're like their smile and dial is like, yo, are you gonna take this meeting? Like some of the best salespeople I've ever met in my life. Like there's this one girl I used to sell art with, and she would close hundreds of thousands of dollars a week, and she just was a hustler, New York accent. Like, anyways, so some of that is just like, it's just born in you. So, yeah. Anyways, polishing that presentation is certainly a plus.
100%. So like, yeah, that was part of my goal too, is how do I set us up for success? How do I set the rep up for success to present well? And like, I always say in this business, priority 1A is performance for the client. Priority 1B is making sure the client feels good about the work that you're doing. They're almost like equal in importance.
Yeah. So what's like, some advice that you'd give to any agency owner right now to make their process better?
Really think about like, how do I make the workflow smoother? If you feel yourself doing something tedious, you should start to question whether or not it's a smart way to do your process. Like anything that you end up doing, like a manual process that you end up doing over and over again, like, can I automate this? And a lot of people talk about AI in sales and like, how is AI going to impact sales, and is AI going to replace SDRs? It's like, no, man, this is like the whole point is that you should shorten the time that you're spending doing things like via AI, or at least that's how I think about it and has been like super helpful for me.
Yeah, totally understood. I mean, I think if you saw, I mean, even so, obviously our tool RevReply is an AI autoresponder, right, with the intention of helping you with speed to lead, right, helping surface these always get back to people. But I think especially with like some of the 11x stuff that's come out in the last month, it's been I think people are starting to realize, hey, like maybe that's not the use case for AI, but you need to start looking at where you can optimize the process. Like that's the portion where AI can come in and work volumes, especially if you can do that with automation.
And as you know, at any agency, like if you're one of the people that's running the show, you are just going from fire to fire over and over again.
You're speaking language, brother. You're hitting me right to the core right now.
As you are putting out those fires, like the smart thing to do is try to think about, like, while I'm fixing this, how do I build towards a system that prevents the fire in the first place, rather than me trying to go and spot check everything and like, put band-aids on everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's it's a very difficult like it's not easy at all, but I think like systems level thinking is really useful and impactful.
Man, it's one of the most important things to as an agency owner, that would be my advice is like I try and think 10 steps ahead. You gotta be looking 10 steps ahead and how do you systemize things because like, the difference between if you're just a one person, you've got your own agency between 10K and 40K and 75K and 120K, like there's just some crazy different hurdles at each of them, and you have to be mentally prepared. And the better systems you can start right here, the better everything else is going to be going all the way up.
Yeah. And I think a modular approach is also useful too, because not all of it's going to work for forever. Like the system, it's very easy to get lost in the sauce and try to, spend a bunch of time building this perfect system, which quick and dirty is actually better. It's like something that you can break and like keep parts of it and, like, oh, this worked for a while, but it doesn't work anymore. And like just knowing that it's not going to be perfect as you move on, I think is also important part of the mindset.
Well, we're going to jump over to the live session. Again, thanks for that advice.